Welcome back to the Fourth Way Podcast. If you are listening to this episode after having finished the previous one, then thank you for coming back. I'm sure there are many who would be intimidated or indifferent to the topic that we're going to be addressing today. So I appreciate your interest, and at least maybe you came back because you believed me and wanted to kind of give me a chance to prove to you that this topic is interesting and important. Before we get deep into the topic, I do want to give you a little bit of background on my relationship to the issue of the human will and kind of what got me started on this, on thinking about this. So I started thinking about this issue all the way back in like middle school. Now, middle school, I went to a small Christian school, and most people in my circles were Arminians, which means that they believed in libertarian free will for the most part. But I had one teacher who was a Calvinist, and he loved teaching, and because he got to teach history. And when he taught history, in one of the years, I think it was 8th grade, he was able to talk about the Reformation. Now, he didn't overtly talk about a bunch of Calvinist stuff, but because of the times and because of going to a small school, I was actually able to hang out with this teacher outside of school. And he was a former Air Force. He was formerly in the Air Force. And so he would take students to like play racquetball afterwards and then go out to eat. And we'd get lots of chances to talk. And it was awesome. And so on those excursions, one of the topics that came up relatively frequently was the issue of Calvinism. Now, while that conversation centered largely around, God's sovereignty and his choice and all that stuff, like at the heart of that issue, it very much was the idea of human free will, and which is why so many people have issues. Like, people don't mind that God is powerful, that God is sovereign. People mind the idea that humans wouldn't have what they perceive to be a free will, libertarian free will. I was repulsed by this, of course, as most people are, and understandably so. And so I kind of wrote it off. But in high school, I started to research it a little bit more because I love to play the devil's advocate. I love to play devil's advocate because, number one, it got under people's skin, and it was just fun to kind of do that, to like argue something that people just hated. But then secondly, as you start to play devil's advocate, you do one of two things. You either come to embrace the thing that you did not like and did not believe because you find out that nobody else can answer the arguments that it levies against the standard view, or you come to recognize, hey, that was a good go. I put everything I could into it, and you know what? I'm not convinced by their arguments. But I understand where they're coming from, and I can respect people who hold this different viewpoint. So that's what I started to do. I started to play devil's advocate and argue for this Calvinistic way of thinking. This the idea that kind of says libertarian free will doesn't exist. So I studied this on and off for quite a number of years more. And it was maybe 2 or 3 years out of college where we started attending a Reformed church where I kind of fully embraced the idea of Reformed theology, which has God's sovereignty at its center and the man's inability. And I was driven there, though, not by God's sovereignty. Like, if you listen to a lot of Reformed people, a lot of Calvinists, they're going to be like, God has to be sovereign. And that just wasn't like that didn't do it for me, because I think God can be sovereign by letting people do stuff. Like like he can give people the will to choose things, and that doesn't mean he's not sovereign. So I didn't think God had to control everything in that way for him to be sovereign. What drove me to the Reformed faith was the idea of the will, and just recognizing the inability of the will, but as well as as well as the extreme weakness of libertarian free will to solve the problems it claimed the other side had, and also creating its own problems while it tried to solve the problems it never solved. So here's why the study of the will was such a turning point for me. I was repulsed by Reformed doctrines initially when their emphasis was on a God who had to have domineering power and control over everything. A God who led with wrath and damned the majority of his creation for all eternity. He set people up to be vessels of destruction just because it pleased him, and they couldn't do otherwise. And that seemed abhorrent to me, and it really still does. So if you're expecting me to come in here with like a Calvinist rant and being all pro-Calvinist and sovereign God in that fashion, then that's not what I am. Because like, where is God as a father in that? Like, where's the Trinitarian relational God of love in that view of God? Arguments for God having to be in control as defined by Calvinists just don't carry much weight with me at all. Because like I said, there are a lot of forms that control can take. And imperialistic notions of domination seemed as much of an imposed syncretistic ethic as anything I had ever seen. And I just don't, that sovereignty, imperialistic sovereignty and domination just don't seem to characterize a God of love for me. But the more I studied the will, the more I was drawn to the Reformed doctrines. As I quoted Luther in the last episode, I think he was right on this, it's only when we begin to understand the will, how capable or incapable we are, that we begin to understand what needs to be done for our right relationship with God, others, and nature to be made right. As I studied the will, I recognized that our situation was far different from what those who adhered to libertarian free will would say. And just as a quick aside here, when I mention free will, I'm referring, as I've mentioned so far, to libertarian free will, which is probably what most people would say they adhered to, right, if they knew what it meant. It's the definition of the will that most of us would say we intuitively hold to, which is that when we make decisions, we could have chosen otherwise. So this libertarian notion of the will, it became far less appealing to me over time because I recognized that not only did it not stand up under philosophical, logical, or scientific, neuroscientific scrutiny, but it also didn't hold up under moral scrutiny. The things that libertarian free will claimed to obtain didn't obtain. Things like responsibility, self-determination, and meaning. In fact, in my estimation, libertarian notions of the will are much worse off in obtaining these things than are some other systems, or at least the system that I'm going to propose, if it can be called a system, I guess. Now, I know this is a bold claim. It's not bold in the sense that it's an indefensible or off-the-wall claim. Many, many, many thinkers have abandoned notions of libertarian free will. However, it is bold in that there are still many who cling to ideas of libertarian free will. I'd say probably the majority of regular people do, like people who, just off the street, people who haven't really studied it much. And even those who don't say that they believe in a libertarian free will still find that we have strong intuitions of a will that is, quote, free. I mean, I completely understand that. I've got those intuitions running deep in me. Now, since we're working with an extremely intuitive and ingrained topic, I'm going to take my time going through this. Many of these episodes are probably going to be shorter than normal, but the concepts are going to be a bit dense and something that you're going to want to mull over for a while. The fire hose method is not the way to go here. My plan is to begin by working through the major issues that I have with free will, and it's going to be important that you come to realize the extreme weakness of the position before I can prevent a case for the alternative. Hopefully, by taking a look at the will, probably the first real look that most will have ever taken, because our notions are so ingrained in us and we just kind of assume them, then you will come to recognize the reality of and need for another system. At least that's my hope. After tearing down the foundations of libertarian free will, I'm going to try to make a case for what an alternative system looks like and why that system is a beautiful and good thing. I really hope you'll stick around because I think I'm going to treat this very differently than you might expect coming from someone who has spent the last 15 plus years in a Reformed tradition. Okay, enough preliminaries. Let's get to the good stuff. Now, I want to start this episode by looking at what I think is the easiest to understand example of the free will problem, as well as probably the most powerful example, at least one that is the most intuitively powerful for me. If you like time travel movies, you've seen a bunch of iterations of this probably. Butterfly Effect, Donnie Darko, Time Traveler's Wife, Back to the Future, and all kinds of, like, there's a great YouTube channel called Omeletto that has a lot of time travel movies, short movies on it, which is just fantastic. Right? They're fascinating. No matter how many iterations of it we're exposed to, we have this fascination with the idea of time travel. So for today's thought experiment, I want you to think back to a moment in your past when you made a decision that you wish you could change, a moment in which you, had you chosen to do or say something other than what you did, it would have saved you great pain or embarrassment or financial loss. And then I want you to answer a question. If we would rewind time so that you were faced with that decision again, would you choose differently? To help flesh this out, I'm going to use a personal example, but not too personal of an example. So I think it was about 2015, we had just a little bit extra money. We maybe had like $2,000 extra dollars or something, which was a rare occurrence and one that hasn't ever really happened again. But I had just a little bit of money, and I was like, you know what? I learned about inflation and all that kind of stuff. I was like, I'm going to invest this little bit of money. And Robinhood was just starting to come out around the 2015, 2016. And so I decided to put some money into stocks. So when I put my money into stocks, at the time, I was like, man, I really believe in IBM, AMD, Intel, right? Those processors and cryptocurrency. Like, I was like, this cryptocurrency thing's interesting, but it's really volatile. And really, what's at the heart of cryptocurrency is blockchain. And IBM in particular, to me, I was like, I'm going to invest in them because blockchain is super useful for lots of different things. It solves some problems, I think. And so I was going to invest in the infrastructure. Less volatile, less risk, less reward. Nevertheless, I thought it was going to get big. Well, the thing is, the stock market, after I bought into it, and I think I had bought like 10 shares of AMD stock, and it might have been like $12 a piece, so $120 or $150, whatever it was. And like, it started to make some money. I was like, great. I mean, very little. But then the market started to go down, and I got so nervous. I was like, man, I can't afford any loss. Like, I just can't afford any loss. And so I was like, I got to sell this. And so I sold everything within, I don't know, a year or two or something. Well, of course, today, like, AMD has skyrocketed in its price. I also had Nvidia and stuff, which has totally skyrocketed as well. And I didn't have any of those stocks when it skyrocketed. Why? Because I sold them. And in retrospect, now that I understand the market more, I thought when things go down, they're going to crash. Like, I need to take my money out. What I didn't realize is that these smaller crashes happen all the time. Since like 2018, there have been a bunch of these, like, where the stock market loses 20% or whatever over a couple week or month period. And I didn't understand how to invest, and I didn't understand that you stick with it for the long term. Now, if I went back to that time and I didn't carry anything with me, I didn't carry this information I have now of the future. I didn't carry the information that I've learned about investing, about how stock markets work and how investing works. I just went back to that day and I said, would I make a different decision? And the answer is no. I don't think I would at all. Right? If we did a strict rewind without importing anything from today, from the future, I would make the exact same decision. Because when I chose to sell my stocks, I did it because of my knowledge and experience and character and all that stuff at the time. My lack of knowledge about how stock markets fluctuate, my insecurity in my experience, my lack of expendable resources that I couldn't afford to lose, my lack of faith in my assessment of AI and blockchain because I had just started studying it and maybe I was wrong. And of course, my inability to see the future. If you rewound time back to that point where I made my decision to sell those stocks, I would make the exact same decision because all of the information and who I was and my experience and everything else at that time would remain the same. The only way I'd make a different decision would be if I imported some other information into that system. And that's what you can see with all of the time travel movies is the only way they're able to change the past is because they bring with them some knowledge about the future or some other information. If I went back as I am and knew what my future self knows, of course I'd make a different decision. But the me who made the decision that was made back then would always make that decision based on all of the experience, knowledge, and character present at that given moment. Now, maybe you think that just isn't the case. Right? I don't see how you can think that, but maybe you think that's not the case. Maybe you're of the persuasion that if you rewound time to that moment, a different decision might be made. Now, I can't prove for certain that that wouldn't be the case, that I could have made a different decision, that I would if you'd rewind things. But I would then have to ask, what does it achieve to admit this? Does that really bring freedom? If I could rewind time back to the moment I sold those stocks 10 years ago, and there was a chance that I would sell them on that rewind, that would be devastating to personhood and responsibility. One time you rewind and I make the same decision. I sell the stocks. Another time I choose to hold them. But why did I choose to sell one time and not another? No information was added to the system. No new character or experience was present in me in either scenario. Nothing at all was changed other than you just happened to rewind it and I just happened to make a different decision. It's just that in one instance, I did one thing and in another, I did another thing. So which choice was representative of who I was in that moment? Which decision would represent me? My knowledge, expertise, or lack thereof, my character, my values, all of it. Like which choice represents me? Both decisions would be just as representative of who I was in that moment, right? What you're saying is that the choice defines who I am, not who I am that defines the choice. Now, what's the big deal? You might ask yourself. There isn't too much of a problem in this example, the one that I gave, but what if we up the ante? Take the most infamous dictator of the 20th century, the person that, of course, we have to talk about whenever we do hypothetical situations and thought experiments. Let's say we take Adolf Hitler and we say there's a fork in the road for Adolf, where one decision was to hate Jews and the other was to love them. What would libertarian free will look like here? Well, in our world, Hitler chose to hate the Jews. But if we rewound time, and maybe we'd have to rewind it 100 times or 1,000, I don't know. But in at least some of those rewinds, we would end up with a Hitler who chose to love the Jews. And maybe he was a philanthropist towards the Jews, fought for their homeland. So which decision truly represents the person of Hitler? The genocidal dictator or the lover of Jews? I mean, the Jew-loving Hitler is just as much a reflection of who Hitler was, because he not only could have made that decision, but he would have made that decision in some iterations of this very same world. And why didn't Hitler make the decision to love rather than to hate? I don't know. Just so happened to in this instance. Just so happened to do differently in a different instance. Now, it's unfortunate for souls like Hitler and Judas, right? Maybe in a different iteration, Peter would have been the one who betrayed Jesus and Judas would have been a devoted follower, right? Because Hitler and Judas would have made the total opposite decision with a different roll of the dice, or if God would simply press the rewind button once or maybe 100 times. Decisions on libertarian free will, then, don't represent who we are in any given moment. Rather, they represent probabilities at best and random chance at worst. Who we are doesn't determine our decisions, but the random dice roll of the decisions determines who we become. Now, of course, you can argue that we can only be judged based on what we actually do. That's the Molinist strategy, Calvinism with dominoes rather than puppeteer strings. And I get that a little bit. Nobody wants to live in a Minority Report world where we are prejudged for actions that we would do but never do, never get to. Yet libertarianism just pushes the problem back into the past. To be judged on future actions I haven't done yet is to judge me for choices not yet linked to my person. But to judge me for my past on libertarian free will is to judge me for actions that are also not directly related to my person, since any look to the past recognizes that the me who chose A is the same me who would choose B. There's no link between choice and person other than I just so happen to choose A in this go-round. Now, I'm sure heads might be spinning at this point, and the free will discussion can go round and round in circles and hurt your brain, and it's tough. So I think I'm just going to stop here for this episode and plan on coming back next week with another critique of libertarian free will. So please, rewind this episode and ruminate on some of the things that we discussed.
That's all for now. So peace, and because I'm a pacifist, when I say it, I mean it. This podcast is a part of the Kingdom Outpost Network. Please check out the links below to find other great podcasts and content related to nonviolence and kingdom living.